hello, this is Praveen. Welcome to netgurukul.com for the ASP.NET Core Web API Beginners to Advanced Training. Today we are in Module 1, like in Foundations of REST and a Web API, like in Session 10. Session 10, like we'll discuss on content negotiation, media types, and formatters. Okay, so here are the agenda items. The first we'll try to know what are media types. So like we in media types, like we have this MIME, this is also called as MIME types. Okay, multi-purpose internal mail extensions. Okay, so we'll try to understand like in JSON, XML, plain text formats. Okay, later we'll understand the different formats like in JSON format and XML formats. Okay, so like introduction with the content negotiation, we'll also try to understand like in content negotiation. Okay, so with hands-on demo. Okay, so let's get started. So what is media types? Media types is names of the data format used in the HTTP communication. Okay, is also called as MIME types. So in the communication between your client and the server, like we have this JSON request and the response, right? So the communications happens with the JSON by default. Okay, so if we wanted to have multiple clients to accept multiple formats, then we are going to use this content negotiation and media types. Okay, so media types is like nothing but like having this particular clients within different formats. Like in that could be a JSON, that could be an XML, plain text, HTML, PDF, JPEG, EGO. So whichever the supported formats. Okay. And in the media types, how they are used, like they are used with the content type like application slash JSON with the header. Okay, acceptance with the header. Okay, so once you go through the demo, you'll get to understand much in detail. So what is content negotiation? Content negotiation is a process of selecting the best response format based on the client request. Okay, so ability to make the API to accept multiple formats, multiple header formats and multiple application formats through headers. I will call this as the content negotiation. Okay, so how that it works, like we need to reach the program.cs class file. Okay, so let me connect to it and explain you that in detail. Okay, yeah, it's got connected. So let's understand MIME and content negotiation. Okay, so you know that thing like in your server, like in the server, like in the communication between your server and the client happens with a JSON format like by default. Okay, so here is my server. Okay, here is my multiple clients. Assume there are multiple clients. So here I have this particular client one. Okay, here I have client two. So this is very straightforward and this is very easy to understand. Okay, so this is very straightforward. I can directly jump into this example, but see here it's very easy to understand here. Okay, so one client is wanted to have this is the default JSON, like in the communication between your client and the server is by default it is like JSON. Okay, consider there is an API over here, like let's say get API. Okay, so let's say API slash products. Okay, so when I this particular request this particular API, when I trigger this API from the client, so the default JSON, the data exchanges between this particular client and the server happens with the JSON. Okay, so but like in this particular scenario, like multiple clients wanted the data in multiple formats. Okay, so for the example, the client one want in JSON, the client two wanted that in XML. Okay, client three wanted that in plain text. Okay, so other is like in the PDF or HTML or something like multiple clients and multiple requesters. Okay, so multiple formats request. Okay, so this thing by default it is handling only JSON, like in this thing, right? So how do I make sure like it has this content negotiation, like in having a multiple capability of making an endpoint to have multiple responses, like in handling multiple requests based on the types. Okay, so I have this thing. I'm going to this program.cs class file and I just registered with add XML serialization format. Okay, so when I mention this, I call this as the content negotiation. Here I call this as content negotiations. Okay, why it is called a content negotiation? Okay, so it is having we are ability of a API like to produce for accept multiple requesters and give the data response in multiple formats. Okay, so here, like in this thing, like I will request as particular thing accept, like header, like in header I'm going to have this after aspect API slash application slash, sorry, application slash JSON. Okay, for this particular thing, like I will have this application slash XML. Here I will have this application slash plain text. Okay, you getting? I think the handwriting is not up to the mark, but still, like if you can see, like in multiple formats, this is like in the PDF. So nothing but I just wanted to send the request like in the header, like where I have this particular acceptance parameter, where I select this acceptance like in application slash JSON. So here this particular header I will send the application.xml. Here I will configure with a plain text. Okay, so you can have this multiple thing like in this particular providing the multiple formats. I call this as MIME types. Okay, so I hope you understand. Like in sending multiple formats, like in this, but I call this as the MIME types. Okay, multiple media type. So what are the multiple media types that the client can handle, like in this thing, like in terms of it can handle JSON, XML, plain text, or PDF. Okay. So this is very straightforward demo. Like in this, I hope you understand like where MIME types has to be defined and where the content negotiation has to be defined. Like content negotiation has to be done at the server side, like in the program.cs class file. Okay, MIME types like in multimedia types has to be specified at the client side, like in your Postman collection. I'm just having this header with application with a relevant format. Okay, so let me open my Visual Studio. See here we are in module 1 session 10. Okay, so I have this simple model with the products model. Okay, as usual, like in products controller. So I have this particular get API which is returning some data. Okay, so let me put a breakpoint over here. Okay, first let me show me a breakpoint, like to show me the program.cs class file. See here, I didn't many have any content negotiation for this. Like in simple, like this is by the default. Okay, so if I go and run this, so this now it is by default, like it will have only JSON. It do not have any other formats. Okay, I need to add the content negotiation here. Okay, nothing but add XML serialization format. So that will allow these multiple formats. 7131. Okay, so here 7, I have this thing like in web API. So let's say I have this particular module 1 session 10. Okay, so I have this one 7131 API slash products. Okay, if I send this request, I have the breakpoint hit already. Just go for F5. See here, I have this default JSON output like in JSON format. So if I wanted to request with the acceptance, like in having this application slash, I wanted to go with the XML. Okay, so when I go with the XML over here and send this request, still I get the JSON format only. See, I'm just still getting the particular JSON format also. But I'm just requested this in the XML format, okay, which is not allowing me. Okay, so I just what I will do is like I'll just configure with the negotiation. That is very straightforward here. If I have this builder.services or add controller, say that add XML serialized format. Okay, so that's it. Like indeed, this is the content negotiation. Okay. So what is content negotiation? Ability of a API to have multiple requests and multiple responses formats. Okay, so I'm just restarting this. See here, I have this particular, now that I have this XML format to have. So when I send the request, so I should be able to get the response in, see, I got the response in XML here. See here, I got the XML. So if I wanted the JSON, I'll get the JSON. So let I remove the breakpoints. Okay. See, I'm able to multiple clients making some multiple requests based on this particular header, acceptance, and application. I call this as the MIME types. Okay, so MIME types, like in having this acceptance, and the value has to be defined. Okay, I hope you understand. So okay, so let me recap you for you everything. So this is very small session and very straightforward. Like in this particular MIME and content types negotiation. So in like having a API to be ability to accept like in multiple JSON request formats, multiple formatters, okay, multiple request formats, okay, that could be a JSON or XML or plain text, okay. So I have this thing like in the program.c file, I can mention that add XML serialization formats. I call this as a content negotiation, okay. So whereas like I can send this particular request where based on the acceptance header in the header. I have something called as acceptance, like I can select this application and slash JSON or whichever the formats I want, and I'll get this particular thing response, right? So I call this as the MIME types, multiple media types. Okay. So that's it for this session. It's very straightforward. So let's catch up with the next session, like in OpenAI and Swagger documentation in ASP.NET Core. So like that, like in this particular thing, like all the APIs, like we are showcasing in the Postman, right? Like in this particular Postman. So we are just configuring with the Postman. I wanted to show that in the Swagger. So we'll see what is Swagger and how do I open that in the Swagger, all the endpoints, and also the Open API as well. Okay. So let's get started with the next session. Thank you. Thanks for watching.